Hi, everyone. I'm Christy Shaw. I'm the CEO of KITE, a Gilead company, and we are entirely focused on CAR T cell therapy in research, development, commercialization, and manufacturing to treat cancer. Today, I'm joined by Lady Nicola Mendelsohn, and we're here to discuss follicular lymphoma and the impact that it has had on her life. Nicola is the founder of the Follicular Lymphoma Foundation, vice president of the global business group at Meta, which is a parent group of Facebook, and a mother of 4. Nicola's story resonates with me, both on a personal and a professional level, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to sit down with her to learn more. So without further ado, welcome, Nicola.
Oh, thank you, Christy. I'm absolutely delighted to be able to be here with you today and also to discuss the journey that I've been on and, of course, the work that I do with the Follicular Lymphoma Foundation.
Thank you so much for joining me. You know, I was very pleased to hear that you would discuss your journey with us. I know in 2016, you were diagnosed with follicular lymphoma. And for our audience, it's a form of non-Hodgkin lymphoma that impacts the white blood cells. Can you share a bit more about what makes follicular lymphoma different from other blood cancers?
Yeah, super happy to be able to do that. And again, I really do appreciate you making the time to have this really important conversation. Follicular is the most common form of indolent lymphoma, and it's the second most common non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in the Western world, about 20 or 30% of all non-Hodgkin's lymphoma cases. And it has an annual incidence of about 5 in every 100,000 people. It accounts for about 22% of all the lymphomas that are diagnosed worldwide. And currently there are very limited options for treatment if you relapse that I'm very focused on because currently it's incurable.
So, you know, from what I understand, follicular lymphoma can take a really long time to diagnose, if you do at all. Can you talk a little bit about the journey to diagnosis?
Yeah, you're right. So I'm quite unusual from a follicular lymphoma perspective because I was actually diagnosed in just 5 days. Many people, and especially women, can walk around with the disease for maybe 2, 3, even longer years because the symptoms that you might experience can often get mistaken for other things. So a feeling of being tired, fatigue, the loss of weight, hot sweats. So you can see those sorts of things, especially if you're an older woman, could be attributed to the menopause. A recurrent cough, that was something I did have for a couple of years beforehand. So I was being looked at for recurrent coughs. But my actual diagnosis came about because I actually developed a very small lump, about the size of a pea, that was in my groin. Now, again, as a woman, I've only ever been told to kind of check my boobs for lumps and bumps. I was never told to think about that in other parts of the body. But that's a real key sign for something like blood cancers, of course, which follicular lymphoma is. That's how I started on my journey.
How did you, you know, there's so many options. First, hard to get a diagnosis, it takes a while. Then you have to navigate, what do you do next, and what treatment options are there, and how do you choose one? How did you navigate that journey?
Yeah, so getting a diagnosis of cancer is horrific. So many thoughts go through your head. You know, I'm a mum of 4, as you mentioned, how you tell your children. So there's a very emotional side of it. There's a great fear. Because of course, when you hear the word cancer, and I know that's something that's pretty pertinent to your family as well, Christy, that, you know, you think about, well, is this it? And then you start to go on a journey of learning, and you spend a lot of time late at night going through different things. And sometimes that's not a good thing. Sometimes it is, because it can help to be an informed patient as well. And then you're thrown, you know, it's a rare cancer. I didn't know anyone that had ever had it, so I didn't really have friends to ask. So people wanted to offer advice. So I spoke to people that had breast cancer, and you know, they told me what theirs. But the truth is, each cancer is different, and I think we've got to get into that mindset that each of these diseases is very specific, very different, and even within the different cancers themselves. So even with follicular lymphoma, you could have different types of follicular lymphoma. Then you get the options on treatment. This was where I was blown away, because I'd never heard that one of the options was to do nothing. All the language around cancer is you've got to cut it out, you've got to zap it and blast it, and you'll be like a warrior and a fighter and you'll beat it or not. But that's not the case with when you live with an incurable disease, because it's about kind of like whack-a-mole. You're going to push it down and you hope the treatment that you push down pushes it down for the longest time possible. So one of the treatments was watch and wait. Let's just observe it. Let's see what happens. That doesn't fit comfortably with that language of cancer. I heard about KITE. It was one of the first things I actually heard about, but actually wasn't available as a first line of therapy. So actually in my first diagnosis, I did nothing and I went for the watch and wait option.
Mm. You know, it's such an amazing journey, because here you are, you know, your career is very demanding. I'm sure you have 4 children, you have so many things going in your life, and then you get hit with this diagnosis. How did you, you know, for me, it was time to refocus my life and help the person that, you know, I would think it helped the person that needs my attention, but you were able to continue to move forward and actually have the energy and capability to actually start your own foundation to help even more patients. How did you navigate, and what made you think to start the Follicular Lymphoma Foundation?
So there's a few things in there. Again, when I was first diagnosed, my bosses, Sheryl Sandberg, said, take all the time you need to get better, to, you know, and we'll be here for you to support you. But once I made the decision that I wasn't going to have treatment, it was like, well, it's back to work then, isn't it? Now, people did say to me, why are you still working if the time is ticking? The truth is the time's ticking for all of us. I love what I do. I am inspired by the work that I do, the people that I get to connect with. And so that in many ways, that'd be like the worst thing possible. But I understand for a lot of people, that's not always the case. Different cancers, different, as you had, I don't know if you're comfortable sharing your own story with your sister in terms of the decision that you made. But so I carried on working, but that wasn't the case for you, was it?
You know, it wasn't. My sister was at the end stage of her cancer, and so she needed a caregiver to be with her to actually go through the therapy. At the time, I wasn't in this job. I was doing something different, and took that time off to be with her, because she specifically, with her cancer, like you said, every cancer is different. Every type of cancer hits every patient differently. It's very personal. And so for her, it was, you know, it was the time where all options had been exhausted, and she was in clinical trials. And so so that part was different. But like you know, the passion to come back and help patients, unfortunately, her journey was cut short. And now I've had this opportunity to try to help others, even though this therapy didn't help her. It has been helping a lot of patients with lymphoma. And so I'm so very humbled to be leading an organization where we can actually tell patients there's more hope and that they don't have to give up, and to give one of those treatment options. So thank you for asking. But for you, you know, typically when somebody gets a cancer diagnosis, they are looking at a period of time, many times of life, based on, you know, here's what you're going to do. This is how long it may last. Here's your next option after that. For you, what is it like to watch and wait? And how does your family, friends, and what it must be like that people know you have cancer, but you're showing up at work every day, and that must be very difficult to navigate.
Yeah, so there's a few things. First off, thanks for sharing, you know, so intimately about your own story. I think we'd all wish to have a sister quite as extraordinary as you. You know, it's a weird one. I was very open about having this diagnosis. I'm a very open person. And I realized that was quite unusual, and especially with a cancer like this, where I look fine. I didn't lose my hair when I did eventually have treatment. And so actually, part of this has been about educating myself, but then other people around me, about how you can live and work with cancer. But I also realized that I'm incredibly blessed, and I am very grateful for the fact that I have a strong family, that I have faith and community, and a supportive workplace. That isn't often the case with everybody. I also realized that the access that I was able to have to, you know, the best in class researchers and doctors wasn't the case for so many people living with this disease. And that in part was because one of the early things I do, and of course you might say, of course you would have done this, is, I went on Facebook to have a look at, well, were there any groups or communities on there about follicular lymphoma? And there was a small one that had been set up not that much earlier than when I was first diagnosed back in November 2016, set up by a lady called Nikki, called Living with Follicular Lymphoma. And it's a funny story actually, because I sent her a message to say, hi, I'm Nicola from Facebook. I'm running the European region. I have follicular lymphoma, maybe I could help you. And she didn't think it was real. She thought it wasn't true. So once we got over that, she and I are now firm friends. And together we've built this community to be 8,500 patients. It's the largest gathering of follicular lymphoma patients anywhere that's ever existed. And it became very evident to me that so many people didn't have that access, didn't have the insights, weren't aware, you mentioned clinical trials, weren't aware of clinical trials that were out there, which I think in cancers like this is so important, that we need to get more patients onto clinical trials and offer so much promise. So that really made me think that maybe there was more that, that perhaps I could do. And so that's when I decided to set up the charity, the Follicular Lymphoma Foundation.
You're so right about clinical trials. It's been really rewarding to see patients who were in our clinical trials for cell therapy living years later. And they're such ambassadors and want to do everything that they can to help. Similar to yourself, it's just amazing the energy and positive energy that they can bring. Would you mind if I asked how are your kids doing? I'm sure it must be one of the most difficult things you said earlier. How do you talk about this in your home?
Yeah, so November 16 was like the worst weekend when it was one thing getting diagnosed with cancer, it was another thing having to tell our children. And our youngest at the time was 11. I'll never forget this day. I can see it so clearly in my mind. It was Sunday morning, 4 kids and John, my husband, we were all together around the table. They could tell something was up. I hadn't been normal that week. I was off work while we were navigating through doctors. You sort of go on that conveyor belt of doctors' researchers while you get the tests, while you get the research back, diagnosis back. I remember telling the children, my mouth, it was very physical. My mouth drew up, went dry. I couldn't get my words out. And then I remember just Zach, my youngest, just at the end of the table, just looking at me and just saying, are you going to die, Mum? And that's not what you want to hear as a mum, is it? And I couldn't speak then. John had to, kind of take over. But from what I said to them that day is to not be scared of it, to always ask any question that they wanted to ask, that we would answer to the best of our knowledge. I told them that it wasn't my intention, that I was going to give it everything that I've got. And if at any time they wanted to ask anything, they could. And so that's how it's been. We don't talk about it every day. The foundation gets talked about, but we don't talk about it every day. And it was a few months later that our daughter Gabby, who's our eldest, I asked how she was doing with it. And she said to me, well, how are you, Mum? I said, well, I'm doing fine. She goes, well, we take our cues from you. If you're doing fine, then we're doing fine. And, we're there for you. So, again, I feel, very, very blessed to have the support of the family and they've been there through thick and thin, fundraising for the foundation, doing, awareness campaigns, there at the launch. It's been very much a kind of family run thing.
That's great. This awareness piece, one of the biggest things that breaks my heart is, we have these therapies and cell therapy being one that could potentially cure a patient, yet only 2 out of 10 eligible patients are even aware of it. And it's at a time in their life when they're either this is an option or palliative care starts. And so what would be your advice to patients as they get diagnosed and how to navigate this So, I mean, most people don't have the scientific knowledge. And even though I do this job, I'm not a science major, but there's so much information. How do you help patients navigate that?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I'll never forget when I was first diagnosed, my general doctor, general practitioner, we call it in the UK, she said to me, I'll tell you something, Nicola, you're going to know more about follicular lymphoma than I do. And I was like, how could she say that to me? She was a friend of mine as well. I was like, how can you say that? You're the doctor, you know more. But I think there's a clue in there. And that's also part of the role of the foundation, was to make sure that we were putting information out there to try and demystify some of the tech kind of science speak around things that makes it really hard for people to be able to navigate. And most people only get 30 minutes, maybe once or twice a year with their doctor, if they're not going through treatment. So, always write the things down, but we're here to try and help and to put out there the range and the different options that are available, whilst also mobilizing this patient group to come together to make it easier for researchers to be able to do the research on follicular lymphoma and to be aware of things like CAR-T, because perhaps it's not available in the area that you might live in, but you might not be aware that there could be a clinical trial that's available that perhaps, that you could get on, and therefore, you've got the possibility of looking at these amazing new, advances in science that we're seeing, which are approved treatment options as well. There's also the case that patients might not be seeing specialized lymphoma doctors. Not everybody does that. And so, the general oncologist might not be aware of some of these new treatments, which we're advocating for, we're pushing for. And the very treatment that I had, if I'd have been treated in November 16, I wouldn't have been able to have the treatment that I then went on to have just 2 years later. So it is a period of fast change. It is something that, the Follicular Lymphoma Foundation is advocating for that change as well, and organizations like yours with CAR-T. So the foundation is here to help, and there are many options out there at all the different stages, and we want to make sure that there's more and one day get to cure.
You're reminding me so much of with my sister's journey of, really, it's not the next option, it's mapping out multiple options to make sure you leave as much opportunity open as possible, because many times you'll be excluded from a clinical trial if you've had certain treatments already. So that's a really great reminder, is, in the beginning, get to a lymphoma expert, because they'll be the best to advise you, because that's what they do every day, all day, not just once or twice a month or once or twice a year for some.
Yeah. And that's part of the reason, I was really keen to do this video with you, not just because I think the work that your own personal story really speaks to me, but the work that you're leading is a real game changer for people that are living with follicular lymphoma. And so that they're aware of the different options that could be available, that was something that mattered hugely to me.
Well, I can't thank you enough, as we come to a close. Nicola, you are so inspiring. Your positive energy, you're giving to others at a time when, it's a very troubling situation for yourself, is just so admirable. I feel so honored to be in your presence and be able to talk to you, and can't thank you enough for joining us. Any last closing comments you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, thank you, Christy, for saying that. That really means a lot to the follicular lymphoma patients out there. What I would say is, we need to do our homework. We need to be aware of the different treatments that are out there, because it's as much currently an art as it is a science in terms of the decisions that are being made. From a foundation perspective, know that I am here to kind of advocate for all follicular lymphoma patients around the world. I wouldn't have set up this charity if I didn't absolutely believe that the science is at a point in time now where we will be able to find better treatments and also more opportunities to be able to find cures. And I, for one, am incredibly excited about the opportunities that CAR-T can provide for all of us. So I'm here, get involved, follow us on our, on our Facebook pages and our Instagram pages. And if you want to know more, you can always check out the website at theflf.org. But thank you again, Christy, for the conversation.
Thank you, Nicola. Thanks everyone for listening.